We're touching wires together and we look like the A-Team or MacGyver to get this thing started. If you're around me, you know I'm going to end up talking about the Dukes of Hazzard and Australian cars, just like Ed Bolian talking about a Flood Gallardo or some terrible supercar that he loves. And notoriously, I love Australian cars. Ed loves terrible supercars. And my friend Dan Dillon had a gorgeous 2016 red Chevy SS, which is a Holden Commodore. And he actually met me at a stoplight because I was driving my green one. And he never saw one out in the wild. I never saw his out in the wild. And I have a license plate on the back of mine that says Retro DJ, so he just simply Googled me or looked up the Retro DJ that had that. So since that crazy stoplight interaction, Dan and I have been best friends. He comes down to VINwiki with me all the time. We just hang out and have a great time. But Dan lives maybe not in the greatest part of Indianapolis, but it's up and coming. So a solid urban renewal. If you ever watch the show Good Bones, they are working on houses all over Dan's place. And so he lives in the tough part of Indy. And he is with me all the time. He's the guy that at 4:15 a.m., if you're like, hey, let's go on a road trip to buy X, he's at your house at 4:16, like we're ready to go. So he has, a nickname of Hot Dog Dan, but we also call him Party Dan because if you're ready to go party in Indianapolis, you should look no further. He's the Chamber of Commerce of Party in Indianapolis. So he called me one morning and just asking if he left his car at my house. And normally that's not a good sign because that means you have partied a little bit too much and you have no idea where it is. And it's either been towed or it's at my backyard or one of insert your friends here, whatever, but you don't expect it to be stolen. And Dan lives at 11th and College, and it sits right on the corner. So if you basically Google Earth it, you can always see it sitting right ready to go out in front of his cool little apartment that he lives there. And one day he knew he had left it there, took the dogs out for a walk, and magically the car is missing. They are rear-wheel drive 6.2 LS3, like they are just valuable cars to engine swap. You can put them in anything. Everybody LS swaps the world anyhow. And now Dan's car is going to be a victim of disposable vehicles because nobody cares once it's stolen. On the Commodores and all of the OnStar stuff, because you're like, oh, we'll just ping it on OnStar or this General Motors product, they're in the worst location of life. You flip the trunk off, like the box is like right there. In about 11 seconds, you pull it out and throw it out, and the OnStar is worthless. And nobody ever recovers a stolen car. Like, you've never had anybody go, other than Tyler Hoover somehow, but nobody ever recovers a stolen car. So months go by, and Dan gets paid out. Hooray for him, but he's lost his car, and that was our common interest, but we're still friends just because, he can drive a Hyundai, and I don't really care. He ends up with this SRT8 Cherokee, and I was worried because he had the horsepower of the Commodore, and now he's going to end up in some van or a minivan or something to haul dogs around in. So we were in the Carolinas hanging out with Rob Pitts, and we ended up in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina. He found an SRT8 Cherokee online, and we went there and actually bought the thing. And so he drove it home, and I pulled a vehicle home. And so now Dan has all this horsepower, and he has a room to haul the dogs, and life is good. And if you Google Earth his house now, the Cherokee now sits where the Chevy SS Commodore used to sit. Life goes on, and we know this car's never going to recover, and we're always kind of cruising the parts because, these are going to be stripped or, we're like, oh, those were Dan's wheels, or magically, the airbags blow in the seats and somebody needs seats. But it never showed up on any of the parts forums, and it never showed up on any of the wrecking places or any of the kind of sketchy parts of the internet. And then the call comes, and I'm like, what? And Dan calls me and says, hey, dude, they found my car. And I was like, I expect it to be on blocks, missing doors, everything. But no, it was complete. He sent me a picture that the police officer had sent him. I'm like, where is this thing? And it is 2 miles from Dan's house. And for the last 180 days, it's been 2 miles from Dan's house. And we get there, and of course, Dan doesn't live in the best neighborhood, but then it just drastically goes a little bit further south the further you get away. And 2 miles away, is Dan in his SRT8 Cherokee. I pull up, and there his car is in an alley. And there was a nice police officer, and he was a fan of that style car. And he had been there on a shots fired call or some terrible thing that happened in an alley call. He just happened to be like, why is there a Chevy SS Holden Commodore sitting on this crappy alley? And he walked up to it just on a whim, and there was a P-Touch VIN number on it. And you know that the brand new cars aren't riding around with a P-Touch VIN. But someone physically had to take the windshield out because it is right in the right spot. Like it's down just covering up the original plate. And that VIN went back to like a Chevy Malibu or some other Chevy product. And we're all standing around. It's a hot day, and they're waiting on the tow truck guy. And Dan and I are looking at it, and it's beat 12 ways to Sunday. I mean, it's bumper covers, and it was a disposal car to them because it was stolen. So whoever the thief was didn't care about it. You used to have to press button start it. Somehow that's, we're touching wires together, and we look like the A-Team or MacGyver to get this thing started. But it's locked up, and it's no longer Dan's car. It's what used to be Dan's car. And it's full of prescriptions and mail and all kinds of clothes and just, crap. Somebody used it as their daily driver. So minding our own business out here waiting on the tow truck driver. And, you're in an alley and looking over your shoulders. And here comes this little kid out of the house that happens to be parked at with another kind of sketchy car. And the officer's looking at him, and he's probably 7, 8 years old. And he's like, hey, partner, whose car is this? And I mean, he knows the code. Like this kid is, I'm not telling on it, I'm not getting beat up or whatever. And so the officer's like 3 or 4 different times are like, whose car's that? Whose house did you come out of? Whatever. And I mean, he clammed up like he knows, snitches get stitches, kind of don't talk, And so finally the cops like look at him, Mrs. Partner, and they're like, do you know whose car this is? He goes, yeah, man, it's my Uncle Tom's. And I'm like, oh yeah, good old Uncle Tom riding up in the Chevy SS. Get out of here, partner. But so Dan wanders off with the police officer to get the little case number. And Dan's been paid. He doesn't need anything out of this car. It used to be his car. It's no longer his car. And while he's there, and I'm by myself with the car, I'm like, man, I'm going to see what is in this thing. And it looked like a set of x-rays in the back, because we already know everybody's names. Every pill bottle's got somebody's name on it, mail, everything, mail to the house where the kid just came out of, like, come on. And it's just this big manila envelope, and it looked like it had x-rays in it. And so I grabbed it out of the back, shut the door. I wander over to Dan's SRT, and I plopped it in the front driver's seat, or the passenger's seat at the front end. And so the cop comes back with a number, and the tow truck shows up, and it's maybe not the best neighborhood we should be hanging out. And I looked at Dan, I said, have you had your piece? Have you said your goodbyes to this thing? And it still hasn't showed up on any of the insurance auctions, so I don't know where it is now. And this is recent, like within the last 2 months, and so it should be now. But so we split, and I called Dan, and I said, look in your driver's seat. And he goes, the one I'm sitting in? I go, no, the passenger seat. And on the floorboard was that 11 by 14 envelope, and I said, I left you a present. And I didn't want him to forget because those were not x-rays in it. They were a family photo of the people that had stolen Dan's car. So to this day, if you go to Dan's house, he's so cool. He has not only kept the photo, but right by his front door, he has framed the photo of the folks that stole Dan's car. So if you are those people, my friend Dan misses his car, has graduated to the SRT8 Cherokee, and now will cherish every moment, every time he walks out of his house as he glances at your photo.
Private party transactions are scary, but Caramel is the perfect tool to keep everyone safe. Once you've worked out your deal, Caramel comes in to work out all the paperwork, do the DMV paperwork no matter what state you're in, verify everybody's identity, and even manage the transfer of the money. So visit Drive Caramel now or the link in the description below, and they'll make your transaction run faster, safer, and more smoothly than any private party deal deserves to be. And for a limited time, Caramel is free to both buyers and sellers. With Caramel, I do the shrewd negotiation, they do the hard part.